It's time you guys know the secret to making less mistakes in VS Code or pretty much any code editor. That secret is line height. Line height, as the name suggests, is literally the space between one line and another. And when you're coding, you might not even realize this, but it can play a big influence into how you write your code, how you see bugs, and how you lay out your code even. Just like in real life, in coding, you don't want the lines of code to be too close together, but you don't want them to be too far apart either. This is why line height is an important thing that we need to investigate to see exactly why you should make sure it's set to what best complements the way that you code. For the longest period, I never touched my line height. I pretty much left it as default, which I think in VS Code is 0 or 1, but as I started coding out bigger and bigger applications and I had to write more and more codes of lines and I had more and more errors, I started to take line height a bit more seriously. And I found that it plays a different factor depending on what type of font you use and how you use it. So let's have a look at how we can adjust the line height and what the different settings can actually imply when you're writing out code. Alright, here's VS Code open with some of the code I'm writing recently. When I was first starting out as a developer, one of the things that I love doing is have a very small font size with a very small line height. This meant that I could see a lot on the page. If I zoom out a little bit here, I could almost see all of my code. But the problem with this is that because I had so much code on the page, I constantly made problems and errors and bugs all over the place because I might not see where there's a typo, I might not see where some of the lines for an if script are closing properly because it's all squished together, and this means that you just can't see it very well. And yes, I can see more lines of code on the page, but tell me honestly, how often are you actually looking at the whole page for your code? You're normally only looking at one small area, so it doesn't really make sense to try and fit lots and lots on that single page. So the first thing I recommend is that if you're working on any line height, don't use something that is the same size as the font. Here I've got font size 12 and my line height is 12, and as you can see, the line height is way too close together. I might not have 20/20 vision, but even if I did, it'd be hard to be able to read all those lines of code together so closely. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the line height to be 0, which will just make it automatic. Most code essentially has a good line height if you just leave it to default on VS Code, and this already will be a much bigger improvement than what we had before. You can already see that this is much more readable than when we had it here at 12. Let's move it back to 12 again for the line height so we can see what I'm talking about. So here, this is 12, so you can almost not see any of the text. It almost blurs together, whereas here is 0, and this already looks much more clean. Now, this brings me to my next point, and it's the fact that when we're writing our code, we essentially don't have to see all of these lines of code. Yes, we've got maybe our minimap, and James Q Quick might tell you you don't need the minimap, but I personally like it. But in terms of the code here, what we can do to make it work a little bit better is to actually improve the line height and make it even bigger than what it is now. So I'm going to do a line height here of double what we have for our font size. So our font size is 12, so I'm going to do 24. Now, this is essentially the trick, the magic that us senior developers probably more often use to take our game to the next level when we're coding. As soon as we do this, we have a big difference to the type of code that we're seeing and what we're seeing on the screen. Firstly, this extra piece of space means that all of our lines of code are very visible. It means that there's more room to breathe. What I mean by this is that if we're following a function or writing it out, the focus here on our first line is this if script, and it means that no one of the other lines are really in the field of focus of what we're looking at. It also means that if there are other lines, they stand out quite clearly. If you've done any design work or listened to any designers, they'll always tell you that space is one of the most important things. Negative space and room to breathe essentially allow the page and the content to stand out. And to be honest, the same principles apply for coding. This is why having things close together and far apart makes such a big difference when you're trying to focus on the code that you're writing. If we were to swap this back to the line height we had before, so let's give that a try to 12 just so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. You'll see that now because of this script being so close together, it almost blends into one big if script. It means that we're not really focusing on this particular line anymore. We're focusing on this whole block. And when you focus on a whole block of code, you're more likely to miss something on a specific line. This is my tip for today. To increase your line height, give it a shot and let me know what you think. This works so much better for writing out HTML code or CSS code or even, well, especially JavaScript. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, hit like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. I'm going to try and do a little bit more like this, giving you tips on things that I recommend and how I set up my environment. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.